Hello, hello. So I was going through just to look at stuff, and I came across a podcast, and I haven't. I only listened to about 5 minutes of part two, uh, and then found part one. And I decided might as well instead of listening to it myself, might as well um, share it with some people. I'm not exactly. I don't know. I guess we'll find out what it has to say together. But give it just a minute. I'll start it. Anybody wants to hang out and listen to it? Cool. If not, cool. Hope everybody's having a good day. Hello, hello. All right, I'm just gonna get this started. I don't even know how long it is or anything else, but I'm gonna listen to both of them and just see. Excuse me, just see what it's about.
Jack Parsons was born in Pasadena, California in October 1914. Shortly afterward, his father got caught sleeping with another woman and even paying her for sex. His wife left him, and she and Jack moved in with her wealthy parents. They lived on a grand estate on so-called Millionaires Row in Pasadena. Jack loved growing up there. He had the run of the whole grounds. As a devoted science fiction geek, he and a school buddy named Edward Foreman started launching amateur rockets there. They'd remove the explosive powder from cherry bombs and other fireworks for fuel. Now, they mostly just ended up blowing holes in the backyard, but it wasn't all their fault. To fly, rockets need steady thrust. That requires a fuel that burns steadily. Unfortunately, explosive powders are mixtures of multiple substances. And if you jiggle the powder too much, those substances start to separate into layers, in which case, instead of burning steadily, the powder explodes. Not ideal for rockets. But little Jack came up with an idea. After thoroughly mixing the powder, he poured glue all over it. The glue hardened and prevented the powder from separating. He still couldn't launch the rockets very high, and the backyard still looked like a bombing range. But he was proud of his little innovation with the glue. In fact, he later returned to the idea with spectacular results. Beyond rocketry, Parsons had darker hobbies too, like the occult. At age 12, he tried summoning a demon in his bedroom. For some reason, he was convinced it worked. This scared the crap out of him. He swore off necromancy forever. It was a promise he would not keep. Between blowing up the backyard and summoning demons, Parsons had a bit of a discipline problem. So in 1929, his mother sent him to a military academy. He promptly blew up a toilet there and got expelled. But the family soon had much bigger worries than Parsons' teenage rebellion. In October 1929, the stock market crashed, and his grandfather's fortune got wiped out. Things got so dire that the 15-year-old Parsons took a job to help support the family. He chose the Hercules Powder Company. There, he could teach himself more chemistry and steal explosives. After high school, he attended college, but dropped out because he could not afford the tuition. From then on, all his chemistry knowledge would be self-taught. In 1935, Parsons married his high school sweetheart, Helen Northrup. That same year, his life swerved forever when he attended a lecture on rocket engines at Caltech. He went with Edward Foreman, the friend who had helped make cherry bomb rockets in his backyard. While socializing after the lecture, Parsons and Foreman met some people who eventually introduced him to Frank Molina, a Caltech student writing a PhD thesis on rocketry. They asked Molina about getting access to Caltech's resources. money, lab space, its 200-mile-an-hour wind tunnel. They also started babbling about using rockets to visit outer space and explore other planets. Now, Molina was a rare credentialed scientist who not only studied rocketry, but loved thinking about space travel. He had been obsessed with space exploration ever since reading Jules Verne as a child. But Molina knew that talking openly about space rockets then was about as bad as confessing that you summoned demons. So Molina told Parsons and Foreman to zip it. They had to be shrewd. They could talk about adapting rocket engines for planes, but they could never mention space rockets, except in secret. With that understanding, the trio joined forces. But despite their secrecy, they struggled to find funding. Rockets just seemed too crazy. So Molina and Parsons began writing a screenplay about two heroic rocket scientists. They hoped to sell the script to a movie studio and use the cash to support their research. When that plan fizzled, Parsons began diverting every spare dollar he earned at work toward rocket equipment. He also sold bootleg nitroglycerin that he made at home. He even pawned his wife Helen's wedding ring for extra cash. You can imagine how she felt about that. The trio's first test took place in the Mojave Desert. Amazingly, rocketry research had barely advanced in the preceding 120 years. The most advanced rockets then were basically the same ones the British used during the War of 1812. You know, the rocket's red glare of the Star-Spangled Banner. The trio in the desert would finally surpass that creaky technology, although not without some hiccups. As the group's chemist, Parsons focused on making the rocket fuel. He tried both solid and liquid fuels. The solid fuel was gunpowder. But again, gunpowder is a mixture of several substances: charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter. On a molecular scale, these substances are different sizes, and if they're jostled, those substances separate out. You've seen something similar if you've ever opened a can of mixed nuts and noticed all the big Brazilian nuts on top. Jostling the can allows the little nuts to slip down and wedge into small spaces. That forces the big nuts up to the top. This same phenomenon happens with the differently sized molecules in gunpowder. This separation causes gunpowder to explode instead of burn steadily. A problem for rockets. Parsons also tried liquid fuel rockets. His liquid fuel motors had two hoses. One fed in liquid oxygen, the other methyl alcohol. These liquids mixed inside a chamber, where an ignition system sparked them to start the burn. The first big test with a liquid fuel motor took place on Halloween in 1936. It did not go well. The motor failed to fire 3 times. On the 4th, the oxygen hose started on fire and began spewing flames at them. But the trio did get better. By January 1937, their liquid engines were producing impressive amounts of thrust. As a result, a faculty member at Caltech offered them some lab space on campus. It was a big break. During the move, the trio decided to call their new outfit the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the famous JPL of NASA fame today. By all rights, it should have been called the RPL for Rocket Propulsion Laboratory. But again, talking about rockets was considered kooky. Meanwhile, the 23-year-old Parsons was making a name for himself in the newspapers. In 1938, a Los Angeles police captain was arrested for trying to murder a private detective. The detective had dug up some dirt on police corruption, so the captain planted a pipe bomb in his car. It exploded but did not kill the detective. The captain was put on trial for attempted murder. As a local explosives expert, Parsons became the trial's star witness. He even built a replica pipe bomb and blew up a Chrysler. The press gobbled it up. It didn't hurt that Parsons was 6'2" and handsome, with sweeping jet black hair and a Clark Gable mustache. His damning testimony sent the crooked police captain to prison and made Parsons a minor celebrity. This celebrity, along with several promising rocket tests, helped Parsons and JPL secure several $1,000s in grants. One grant involved developing rocket plane engines for the Army. Unfortunately, the JPL trio quickly wore out their welcome at Caltech. Their work was pretty noisy, with engines revving day and night. And Parsons had a, let's say, relaxed attitude about safety. His equipment suffered chemical leaks all the time. One leak scorched an entire lawn outside. Another seeped into other labs in the building and corroded all the metal equipment there. Then there were the explosions. One proved especially dangerous. It almost decapitated someone and left a thick piece of shrapnel embedded in a wall. Overall, JPL spent a quarter of its grant money just repairing buildings around campus. People referred to them as the Suicide Squad. In 1940, JPL was finally banished from campus. They set up shop instead in a canyon in western Pasadena. It was pretty rugged at first, just some unventilated iron sheds to store equipment. But their facilities grew and eventually became what's now the JPL campus today. Molina and Parsons soon emerged as the driving forces of JPL. Their relationship was tense sometimes. Molina was methodical. He stressed the need to collect data and understand each step before moving on. Meanwhile, Parsons always wanted to race ahead. Even before one motor was built, he was already babbling about his next big idea. But to be fair, Parsons had plenty of brilliant ideas. People began joking that JPL really stood for Jack Parsons Lab. He was that important. Before long, however, the joke began to grate on the other members of JPL. They even grew to hate Parsons' presence there. Why? Because even though he had sworn off summoning demons, Parsons had never quite given up his fascination with the occult. In fact, that obsession was about to take over his life. Jack Parsons always had a literary side. He read poetry and Greek mythology. He also joined a science fiction club in Southern California, where he rubbed elbows with Robert Heinlein and Ray Bradbury. But above all, Parsons read about the occult. He was especially enamored with the British Satanist Aleister Crowley, a man who once declared himself to be the so-called Great Beast 666. Parsons didn't hide these interests from his colleagues at JPL. To the contrary, during rocket tests, he would recite a poem of Crowley's called Hymn to Pan. He said it brought good luck. His colleagues just laughed and shook their heads. One called him a delightful screwball. No one took it seriously. Except for Parsons, who took it way too seriously. Parsons saw rocketry and the occult as two sides of the same coin. Both offered a chance to slip off the bonds of Earth and roam free. Rocketry freed your body to roam, while the occult freed your mind and soul. In 1939, Parsons and his wife Helen attended a so-called Gnostic Mass. It's a rite in a religion called Thelema. Aleister Crowley invented Thelema in the early 1900s. It drew on a melange of different practices, from ancient Egypt to pagan rites to Freemasonry. Two central aspects of Thelema are magic and sex rituals. In Thelema, magic doesn't mean stage illusions. It's more like paranormal experiences, interacting with spirits, talking with the dead. Meanwhile, sex rituals are exactly what they sound like. In Crowley's religion, sex was considered a sacrament. And during the Gnostic Mass, worshippers ate so-called cakes of light. They're Eucharists made of flour, honey, oil, ash, and often bodily fluids like semen or menstrual blood. After attending the Mass, Parsons and Helen grew fascinated with the religion. Parsons even began trying magic rituals himself. He interpreted his experiences through the new science of quantum mechanics. With his typical manic enthusiasm, Parsons also began recruiting people to try his new religion. His scientific colleagues all said, no thank you. But Parsons and Helen did recruit Helen's half-sister, Betty. Parsons and Helen eventually moved into a mansion with several other Thelemic worshippers. They essentially formed a commune, with each person paying $100 for rent. To Parsons' delight, the house sat on Millionaire's Row, the same street he grew up on. It was a 3-story American craftsman mansion. It had pitched roofs, palm trees, and a wide front lawn. A former Caltech benefactor had built it. Albert Einstein used to stay there when he visited campus. But now Parsons and his fellow occultists live there. And Parsons threw himself into the lifestyle. He decorated his and Helen's room with a statue of the licentious Greek god Pan. He also displayed his collection of swords and daggers. Now, Millionaire's Row was also home to several well-heeled society types, like Lily Bush, heiress to the beer fortune. And these blue bloods did not appreciate their new neighbors, who tended to throw wild parties with loud jazz music. Tisk tisk. But whenever the police stopped by to investigate, Jack Parsons would meet them at the door. He would casually mention his job as an esteemed scientist at Caltech. Why, he was practically the incarnation of respectable middle-class values. Reassured, the police would leave. Still, things got messy at the commune in 1941. That summer, Parsons' wife Helen took a long vacation. And while she was gone, the 26-year-old Parsons started sleeping with her half-sister, Betty. He did so with the full knowledge and support of his housemates, even though Betty was 17 years old. When Helen returned, Parsons confessed everything, but he did not apologize. In fact, he bluntly told Helen that he found Betty far more provocative. He was determined to be with her. Betty also declared her love for Parsons. Now, this obviously stung Helen, but instead of wallowing, she simply began an affair with the spiritual leader of the commune, a man named Smith. That affair also blossomed into love. All's well that ends well, I guess. All the love triangle stuff was Parsons' personal life. It didn't really affect his work at JPL on rockets. But other club activities did. Commune members drank heavily and used a lot of drugs. This clouded Parsons' thinking and left him exhausted. Then one commune member borrowed a gun from Parsons. With it, the man drunkenly hijacked a car. He got sentenced to 2 years in San Quentin prison. Given their army contract, JPL scientists had to maintain a level of decency and decorum. Parsons' occultism was quickly shifting from a harmless quirk to a serious liability. And things were about to get much worse, partly because of the arrival of a new person at the commune, one L. Ron Hubbard, whose story we'll tackle in next week's episode. This is part 2 of a 2-part series, so if you missed part 1, I suggest you listen now. When World War II ended, rocket scientist/devil worshipper Jack Parsons was living with his occult friends in a commune in a grand mansion on Millionaire's Row in Pasadena, California. And in August 1945, a fresh face showed up there. A former Navy lieutenant named L. Ron Hubbard, the future founder of Scientology. Parsons was immediately smitten. Parsons practiced a magic-based religion. It involved communing with gods and demons. And Hubbard was the most gifted, most natural magician Parsons ever met. Hubbard had an amazing gift for contacting otherworldly apparitions. Parsons quickly welcomed Hubbard into his commune's inner circle, and Hubbard repaid this generosity by sleeping with Parsons' young girlfriend, Betty. In fact, Betty soon ditched Parsons to date Hubbard full-time. So did Parsons kick him out of the commune? Sock him in the teeth? No. Parsons was angry, but magic was a far higher priority, and he didn't want to alienate Hubbard and his gifts. In fact, Parsons soon approached Hubbard with an offer. Parsons wanted to revive his childhood fantasy and summon a spirit from another realm, specifically a goddess named Babylon, aka the Scarlet Woman. To be blunt, the Babylon Scarlet Woman was a sex goddess. Parsons had a theory that the world then was ruled by a violent demigod. His evidence was World War II. By summoning a sex goddess from another dimension, Parsons hoped to teach the world to love. And to Parsons' shock and delight, the spell actually worked. From the Science History Institute, this is Sam Keene and the Disappearing Spoon, a topsy-turvy science-y history podcast, where footnotes become the real story. One reason Parsons was so delighted to meet L. Ron Hubbard was that, frankly, his professional life as a rocket scientist was in shambles. Even though, over the previous few years, he had been responsible for some major breakthroughs. Parsons secretly wanted to send astronauts to the stars, but most scientists then considered such ambitions loony. So Parsons focused on military applications, like building rocket motors to help airplanes take off faster. Parsons first tried using gunpowder, but the ingredients in gunpowder separate over time, which can cause explosions instead of a steady burn. So in the early 1940s, Parsons harkened back to his childhood. As a boy, he had taken the gunpowder inside cherry bombs and mixed in glue to keep the powder from separating. Given his inexperience then, his rockets still mostly exploded and left craters in the yard. But the idea of using glue as a binder still seemed promising, so the adult Parsons began experimenting. He finally developed a promising recipe, a mix of gunpowder, glue, cornstarch, and fertilizer. His team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory decided to test this mix in so-called JATOs, Jet-Assisted Takeoff Motors. His team bolted several JATOs under the wing of a small, lightweight aluminum plane. Like all planes then, this one had a propeller to help fly. The JPL crew snapped the propeller off. This plane would fly, or not, on jet rocket power alone. When everything was ready, an Army pilot fired up the JATO motors. Nothing happened. The motors choked. Parsons' team grumbled and tinkered, then told the pilot to try again. This attempt did not go well. One motor exploded, tearing rivets out of the wing. Shrapnel also blasted the plane's body, tearing a hole in it. The pilot was lucky to survive. But a week later, the pilot bravely climbed back into the cockpit for a third test. You can imagine Parsons pacing and holding his breath. What would go wrong this time? Nothing. The motors fired right up, and the pilot blasted down the runway. He took off at a distance 30% shorter than normal. Parsons and JPL had just launched the first ever American vehicle with jet rocket motors. Quite an achievement for a self-taught, ragtag chemist. Still, the whole experience had been dicey. The gunpowder glue mix was still prone to exploding. By June 1942, Parsons knew he needed to shift away from gunpowder. But to what? At this time, he had also been contemplating liquid fuel motors. Liquid propellants are mixed right before ignition and therefore cannot separate. Unfortunately, using liquids requires pumps, which complicated the motor. But one hot afternoon that summer, Parsons happened to see some roofers working. They were pouring asphalt, a thick, oozing liquid that solidifies into a solid. Suddenly, everything clicked. Asphalt burns readily. It's also liquid, so you can mix in other propellants. But it hardens into a solid, so nothing separates. And because it's a solid, you don't need pumps either. Asphalt combined the best of both setups. It's both fuel and glue, a brilliant combination. Parsons started experimenting immediately. He found that a mix of asphalt with potassium perchlorate burned perfectly. He finally had the rocket fuel of his dreams. Perhaps the stars weren't so far off. Unfortunately, Parsons' main funder, the Army, was less enamored. One problem with asphalt rockets is that you can't turn the motor off. Once you ignite the asphalt, it just burns until it runs out. That's not ideal for planes. So the Army demanded that Parsons focus on purely liquid fuel rockets. However annoyed, he obeyed. And within a few months, he achieved a second major breakthrough. Again, liquid fuel motors combine two propellants and ignite them with a spark. But it proved hard to build a reliable ignition system. So Parsons began experimenting with chemicals that ignite spontaneously upon mixing. It's like two people who can't stand to be near each other. As soon as they interact, boom. Some liquids do the same when mixed. After trying various combinations, Parsons successfully built a spontaneously burning liquid fuel motor using aniline and nitric acid. In the span of 1 year then, Parsons invented two completely new types of motors, the basis for the first practical rocket engines. Both were low cost and high performance, what we would call disruptors today. During World War II, the U.S. military used Parsons engines in thousands of planes. The boost in speed they provided allowed planes to take off on aircraft carriers, a major advance. Planes could also now land in remote areas with short runways and rescue troops. This saved an estimated 4,500 lives during the war. Given the high demand, Parsons' JPL colleagues founded a company to manufacture motors. One suggested calling the company Superpower, but others said no. That sounded too juvenile, too much like Superman. Instead, they called the company Aerojet. It would go on to become one of the most celebrated aviation companies in history. Despite possessing zero business skills, or really any business sense, Jack Parsons became a vice president. But before long, Parsons' interest in the occult became a major liability for Aerojet. Parsons' lifestyle among the occultists in the commune was mostly harmless. He'd spend hours in the bathtub playing with toy boats. He'd greet people at the door holding a giant snake. He'd conduct seances to contact Egyptian gods. Typical shock the bourgeoisie stuff. Other activities proved more troubling. Earlier, Parsons had abandoned his wife to date her then 17-year-old sister, Betty. Other commune members were accused of sleeping with a 16-year-old boy. Neighbors spied naked pregnant women jumping through bonfires in the yard.
Imagine that.
Parsons was also making illegal bathtub absinthe, as well as taking cocaine, speed, morphine, and peyote. His many hungover mornings enraged other Aerojet executives. Finally, they had enough. They fired Parsons. And in truth, this was probably wise. At that point, Aerojet did not need his explosions of insight anymore. They needed the steady, reliable burn of 9-to-5 work, which was not Parsons' forte. Aerojet had business contracts and needed FBI security clearances. Parsons had to go. Still, in appreciation, Aerojet gave Parsons $11,000 in severance. However devastated about the firing, the money allowed Parsons to purchase the commune's mansion as a consolation prize. He had now come full circle. His family had lived on Millionaire's Row as a child, but had been forced to leave due to money problems. Now he had a house of his own there. People began calling it the Parsonage in his honor. And then, as mentioned before, L. Ron Hubbard showed up at the door in August 1945. Despite their romantic rivalry, Parsons latched on to Hubbard. To Parsons, rocketry and the occult were intimately intertwined. Rocketry freed the body from the surly bonds of Earth, while the occult freed the mind and soul. And with his rocketry career in shambles, the occult was all Parsons had left. So he convinced Hubbard to help him summon the sex goddess Babylon, or the Scarlet Woman. They began the summoning ritual in January 1946. As for what they actually did during it, I have read their notes, and frankly, I cannot make heads or tails of it. They consecrated a dagger, played classical music, sprinkled some blood around. Maybe you had to be there. But they swore that spooky things happened in response. A lamp fell. The electricity went out. A windstorm began. Totally unexplainable stuff. Then they waited, and soon a scarlet woman did walk into Parsons' life. A former Navy PR officer visited the parsonage, curious about the religious worship and magic she'd heard about from her friends. Her name was Marjorie Cameron, a vivacious woman with stark red hair. Parsons became obsessed with Cameron. After all, he thought he had summoned her from a different realm. They began a torrid affair and basically locked themselves into a room for 5 weeks of loving. Parsons sincerely thought of this sex as a magic sacrament to bring world peace. The two eventually got married. But not before L. Ron Hubbard screwed Parsons over again. In 1946, Hubbard approached Parsons with a business plan. Hubbard proposed buying yachts on the East Coast, sailing them to California, and selling them for a steep markup. Parsons, the poor boob, agreed. He blindly gave Hubbard his life savings, nearly $21,000. Shortly after which, Hubbard disappeared to Miami, taking Betty with him. At first, Parsons was too distracted with his scarlet woman to realize he had been scammed. When it finally dawned on him, he raced over to Miami. He found a yacht that they had purchased, the Blue Water, but not the couple. But a few nights later, the harbor called to say that Hubbard and Betty had just fled. He locked himself into his hotel room and got out his book of spells. He decided to summon a weather demon to stir up a storm. The ritual involved pentagrams and geomancy, whatever that is. And, coincidentally or not, a storm really did kick up off the coast. Hubbard and Betty's yacht got clobbered. A sail was torn off. They limped back to port to find Parsons waiting for them. Parsons ended up getting some of his money back, but not all. After that, he and Hubbard parted as enemies. And while Hubbard went on to wealth and fame through Scientology, Parsons' life began unraveling. After being fired from Aerojet, Parsons wanted to get back into rocketry research. But the field had changed on him. It wasn't ragtag dreamers in the desert anymore. Businesses were popping up. The military was involved. People needed security clearances from the FBI. At first, Parsons cooperated with the FBI. He even informed on a few colleagues, ratting them out as communists. But when the FBI examined Parsons' own life, they were horrified. He read communist newspapers. He'd slept with a 17-year-old. He summoned demons. The FBI soon stripped Parsons of his clearance, meaning he could not work in rocketry. He had to take jobs as a washing machine mechanic and hospital orderly instead. Eventually, former colleagues intervened. They said Parsons was too brilliant to waste on washing machines. So the FBI relented and restored Parsons' clearance. But a few months after securing a new job, Parsons got caught stealing documents, reportedly to sell to foreign governments. He got fired again, and the FBI stripped him of his security clearance permanently. Frustrated, unable to work, Parsons soon embraced occultism completely. He declared himself the Antichrist. He also began visiting prostitutes for more sex magic rituals. The poor women must have been terrified. Before long, Parsons had to sell the parsonage, the second time he had been ejected from a home on Millionaire's Row. He moved into the coach house with his wife instead. To make money, he set up a lab in the garage where he made special effects chemicals for Hollywood. Pyrotechnics, fog, things like that. One afternoon in June 1952, Parsons got a rush order for some pyrotechnics. He headed down to the lab and started mixing chemicals. Around 5 p.m., 2 quick explosions rocked the neighborhood. Bang, bang. Neighbors rushed over to find a huge hole in the ceiling. The lab's windows were shattered, and the heavy garage door had been torn from its hinges. Amid this wreckage lay Parsons. His right forearm had been blown off, and half his face was missing.
Damn it.
He died within 40 minutes. His last words were, "But I'm not finished yet."
Oh, you're done.
No one knows what caused the accident. Parsons had always been cavalier about danger and probably just dropped some explosives he was mixing. That caused the first bang. Dangerously, he often kept other explosives just lying around. Those probably ignited and caused the second bang. But rumors have always swirled about darker explanations. A neighbor on the scene supposedly found a syringe of morphine in the lab trash can. Was Parsons high? Others whispered that the rush order story was a cover-up. They swore he'd been driven to suicide or was trying a new magic spell. Some people even invoked conspiracies. In 1938, a crooked LA police captain had been caught planting a bomb in a detective's car. Parsons' testimony at the trial had sent the man to prison. Well, that captain had been released from prison just days before Parsons died. Was that a coincidence? Many people doubted it. Regardless, Parsons died too young, just 37 years old, and he left a complicated legacy. Occultists still revere him. In some circles, he's even given credit for attracting the first alien visitors to Earth. After all, he was a rocket scientist, and his first big ritual to summon beings from another dimension took place in 1946. UFO sightings began the very next year at Roswell, New Mexico. Surely not a coincidence. In reality, there's a much more interesting explanation for Roswell. I've actually put together a bonus episode about it at patreon.com/disappearingspoon. It might surprise you to hear that the Roswell affair really did involve unidentified flying objects. Just not the type of UFOs you're probably thinking. That's patreon.com/disappearingspoon. In rocketry research, Parsons' legacy is both more precarious and more secure. Secure because he was unquestionably one of the greatest rocket scientists in history. Both his solid fuel and liquid fuel motors were big breakthroughs. NASA's Titan rockets, as well as the space shuttle, were both based on his work. When someone once referred to Wernher von Braun as the father of rocketry research, von Braun shook his head no. He insisted that Parsons deserved the name more. And yet, groups like Aerojet and JPL, groups that Parsons co-founded, are reluctant to embrace him. It's not hard to see why. Parsons was pretty loony. But maybe that looniness wasn't incidental to his genius. It can't be a coincidence that the most eccentric rocket scientist around also had the most original ideas. As they say, there's a fine line between insanity and genius. If Parsons had lived, there is no way he ever would have worked at NASA. The agency was too buttoned up, too straight-laced. In many ways, the establishment simply used Parsons, milked him for ideas, then discarded him. But Parsons sure didn't do himself any favors. He led a reckless life, and he certainly had no need to summon demons. He already had plenty of his own. This is the Disappearing Spoon podcast, brought to you by the Sun.
Sorry, David, I forgot to text you. I just remembered. I apologize. Yeah? Put them out there, tell them go pick up sticks. I don't know, that was interesting. Thank you for whoever hung out and listened. This world's a lot smaller than most people think. Just different connections and elbows that are rubbed, different times, different relationships that form. It's kind of interesting. Well, I think I might go take a nap. Sounds like a positive thing to do. Okay, I will, David. What an asshole, huh? Oh, I completely forgot. Well, you guys have a good day. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate it. We'll see you soon.